It is lunchtime live with Colton and Brandon. So just a quick recap. Actually, some very interesting things, awesome things are happening in the Salt Lake Valley. We just finished up with the NBA All-Stars last weekend. We had a record-breaking day yesterday of snow. I think we got like 15 inches or something. And I'm hearing all over the streets about lunchtime live. Colton's name is all over the streets, every street corner. So last time we did software deadlines. So how to meet your time deadlines. And that went really well. That was last month. So we're doing one of these a month. Today, we're going to go over more of the cost in software. So we'll have Colton kick this off. And as always, any questions that you have, let us know. You can put them on the messages here. We'll kind of watch the messages, as well as you could raise your hand and join in.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for kicking us off, Brandon. Yeah, we're actually doing this topic really based off of popular demand. We're trying to release a video every month, covering anything as far as software development, working with a software development company, really anything that goes into building software of your own. We're trying to cover that, right, and educate people. The question that keeps coming up as we talk to our current clients, potential clients, people in the space, people getting into the space, pretty much the number one question that keeps coming up is cost, right? Am I spending the right amount of money? Am I budgeting correctly? How much do I need to budget? We really find that a lot of people have, really have no idea how much it's supposed to cost, right? A lot of people don't have experience in it, so they don't know what they're getting into. And there's so many variables to take into consideration. There's no simple, straight answer. So hopefully we'll be able to get into it a little bit deeper today and provide some information for anybody listening, or to the live show, or for anyone listening to the recording. We'll be able to get you some good information and help you make some decisions. So with that, jumping in, really the comparison I want to go through today is really the difference between an outsourced partner. Really meaning anybody, if you're working either overseas direct, or you're working overseas but managed through a US company with a model similar to what Zibtek's doing, versus hiring someone in-house, right? And what are the pros and cons of that? What's the cost of that? Really give you the information to make that decision. So starting off, really in the market right now, for like a managed outsource company, similar to like Zibtek, the rates are going anywhere from like $45 to $50 an hour for like a standard engineer with anywhere from like 3 to 5 years of experience. Once you start getting into more of the senior level guys, you're looking at, I apologize, let me backtrack that. I got that wrong. That's more for the senior level guys, anywhere from like 45 to 50. And that's 5 years plus typically. And then when you're looking at somebody that's more, that 3 to 5 years, maybe even less than that, 2 to 5 years, we're seeing in the market, it's about, $38, $39, $50, $40 an hour for those developers. So really, when you look at that for a yearly cost, more of a senior developer is about $90,000 a year. A more standard developer, 3 to 5 years, is about $75,000 a year. Now, when you compare that to a U.S. engineer, really the average in the U.S. right now, kind of barring out any of the outliers, obviously somebody working in San Francisco or, in Manhattan or something like that, those are going to be those outliers that this cost is going to, maybe even double or triple just based off cost of living. But, really looking at the U.S. average, you're looking at, even for a junior developer, right? Somebody right out of school, someone with like less than a year of experience, they're going for anywhere from 90 to 100,000. So that's someone that really doesn't know anything. It's just a developer. Maybe can write some simple code. So that's kind of eye-opening right out the gate. You could get a senior guy outsourced for about the same cost as you could get someone in the US at a year. And that's, again, getting rid of the outliers. We're not talking about people living in California or New York. And then when you look at 1 to 3 years, the average is about 100 to 140,000. And then when you get more into the more senior guys, 5 to 7 years, really like bottom, like the really, really great deal minimum is about 150. And that can jump all the way up to 250, 300,000, depending on skill set and what you need, right? So there's a really big difference, right, between when you're looking at outsource rates and US rates. Typically, you can pretty much get 2 developers outsourced for the cost of 1 US in-house, and that's just straight if you're comparing salary to salary. Now, on top of that, when you really look at salary to salary, right, if you're paying an outsourced company, you just have that fixed cost, right? You're paying them monthly. You pay them monthly, and at the end of the year, you would have paid about $75,000 for a standard developer. And then when you look at the US, you're looking at about 100 to 140 for their salary. But the other thing that a lot of people don't take into account when they're just looking strictly at salary is what are all those other costs that go into that? And that's strictly just speaking pay, right? So we just talk about just pay. If you hire an engineer in-house, right, you've got to pay, 401k matching, you got to do, healthcare, dental, really any of those benefits that you pretty much have to have nowadays, right? Like the market's very competitive. If you don't have good benefits at your company, you're probably not going to be able to attract good resources. And everything else that comes along with taxes and everything. Really like a good HR rule when you're looking at salary and how much it's going to cost you to hire somebody and keep them on for a year. You're looking at, an extra 20 to 30% of what you're paying them. So if you're looking at, 100 to 140,000, you're looking to pay an extra $20,000 to $30,000 in those benefits and taxes and such. So that's another thing to consider if you're looking at outsourced versus in-house is, you got that salary, which is always good, right, to compare, but you got to think about all those other things you got to pay when you're paying a direct employee.
Yeah, not only that, but I mean, if you look at, aside from just the cost advantages and what we give to the client is, if you hire someone in-house and there's a particular technology that we're working on, and we've run across this on the sales floor a lot of times, is that one of the worst things that you can do is have to fire somebody. So if you bring them in, hire them on a specific technology, and I know we're talking about cost, but it's relevant, right? Because if the technology changes or you need to add, let's say AI or something like that into what you're building, what are you going to do? Are you going to hire another person? Or are you going to have to let that person go and start a whole new technology stack or something like that? So with Zibtek, the advantage is, hey, you've got this developer and now you've got another technology that comes along. All you have to do is reach across into our team, and now you can source different technologies. We also have the advantage of that individual's resource going out to their entire team to find other technology information.
Yeah, definitely. Good point. Good point. So, right off the bat, we talked about cost. It probably kind of sounds like we're bashing on the US guys versus outsourced. And the reason why it kind of comes across that way is really the biggest con of hiring someone in-house is going to be cost, right? US engineers cost a lot more than engineers you can find, in South America and India, and Eastern Europe, in Eastern Europe. Obviously, there's other reasons why you don't want to go with Eastern Europe at the at the current time. But there's a lot of other countries that have just as good of engineers as the US, and they're a lot more cost effective. So it will sound like we're bagging on them a lot, but there are a lot of pros, which I can get into right away with having someone in the US, right? The biggest one that always kind of comes up immediately, might not be the biggest deal, but it's always the first thing people think about is time zone. Ultimately, having someone in the same time zone with you is just easier to manage, right? If they're working the same hours as you, it's kind of easier to keep track of where they are, what they're doing. It's easier to connect with them, get on meetings with them, and speak with them. They're obviously if you hire in-house, a lot of people are doing remote now, but one big benefit is they're in the office, so you don't have to call them up. You don't have to schedule a meeting. If you want to discuss something, or if you want to work on something, or if you have questions, you can just walk over and grab the person and speak with them. The next thing is communication. Obviously, if you're working with someone in a different country, there's going to be, some sort of either language barrier or a cultural barrier. So having someone in the office is going to help with communication, right? Even when you're trying to just get to know the person and you're trying to connect with them, you could talk to them about, the NFL or the NBA or something like that, right? That's big in the US. That might not be big in another country. So that's always really helpful. And then really the biggest point, the last point of having someone in the US that we see as the pros is convenience. There's not a lot of big pros as far as, people, I think, sometimes get this preconception that US developers are better than other developers in other countries. But if you really look at the big tech companies, most of their developers are brought in and hired from other countries. So there's really nothing that shows that someone in the US is a better engineer or developer than someone in another country. Ultimately, the decision that we find people go with in-house developers is just convenience. So it's not necessarily helping their business. It's not helping their ROI. It's not helping, how they do as a business. It really just comes down to the person in charge, the person doing the hiring, doesn't want to deal with the headaches of hiring someone outsourced, right? They just want to make it easy. So they go with the convenience, which, I mean, as every consumer, we all like convenience, right? Convenience sells. Amazon's big because of convenience, right? You just press a button and it shows up at your door. Exactly. So it is a big thing, right?
Well, and also on that point, if you look at the types of clients that we have, a lot of startup companies, but a lot of what we call staff augmentation, which is a company that's already established, that has a team. They just need more bodies, right, to work. And so we're not really trashing on the US in the terms of we don't want you to hire or whatever. We actually like when companies come in and they already have an established team. So maybe it's one dev or something like that. In that scenario, we can actually fit very well in that position, right? So we're very flexible in using their systems and fitting into their processes and scrums and stuff like that. So it's not at all that you have to do one or the other. It could actually be a combination of both. And real quick, just as kind of a segue here, I wanted to answer this question. Do companies that have US-based engineers typically utilize more proprietary software to reduce development time and in the process reduce costs? And then kind of follow up, are there any drawbacks to that, or is it standard practice? We'll get to that.
Yeah, good question. So yeah, I guess it depends, right? I don't know if it would necessarily be a US versus, like India or like South America or anything like that question necessarily. But yeah, some companies like to do a lot of like in-house proprietary code, right? Everything's written by them and handled by them. That's going to help you with, scaling as time goes on, right? Because there's less dependency on, third parties. And really you're going to understand your code end to end. If you have your development team wrote the whole thing, right? You're not, injecting code from someone else or reusing some sort of library. But it is a lot slower to build that way, right? It's going to take a lot more time. And a lot of companies don't have the ability to take a long time to build things, right? So I would say it kind of depends on the company size. I would say with, it's maybe a smaller company with a smaller budget is going to want to lean on, third-party services or third-party libraries to build things and get things to market quickly. A larger, especially like enterprise type client is going to want to have everything be proprietary, right? And have everything written by themselves. And obviously there's a lot of overhead that goes into that as far as documenting that, making sure that's managed. But if it's managed well and documented well and ultimately built well, in the long run, it's going to be better, for their application and for their software. Hopefully that answers your question. I'll keep moving on, but if you have any other follow-ups or any other questions, please throw them in chat. Yeah, I guess to move on to our next point. So kind of went over the cons or the pros of working with the US. Really, right, time zone, they're there in the office, communication, convenience. Really, that kind of goes right into the cons of working with someone outsourced. It's really kind of the same thing. The biggest things with outsource is, time zone, they work in different time zone than you. There's going to be cultural or language barriers. Maybe, there's just that disconnect because you don't see them, you don't know them. So there's some communication breakdowns. That's really the biggest cons. When you work with an outsourced company and you're looking to partner with one, I would ultimately try to find someone that takes care of those cons for you, right? Has a plan around that. So, obviously kind of pitching Zibtek, we're aware of those cons and we put things into place to help with that. We do have our developers in India, so they're on about 12 hours. It's 11 and a half hour difference from where we are here in Utah. And that's why we have our US based project managers to really be the point of contact with our clients. And that really is our biggest thing that covers all of those big cons of working with an outsourced, partner, right? Is we have our US based project manager that works in the same time zone as our clients, We obviously are US based, so you don't have to deal with, accent or language barriers. There's no cultural barriers. We really do all of that work for our clients. We take all of their requirements and then we package it and put it in a way for our engineers to be able to consume quickly and easily. And then when they have questions about something, right, that they don't understand, maybe we're building an application for a service that works different in their country than it does in the US. Our US project managers do the legwork to explain that to the engineers, make sure it's built properly. So that kind of covers, pros of the US, cons of the outsourced. I did want to kind of get into, cons of the US again, and then talk about, pros of the outsourced, right? So if we get into the cons of the US, which we've hit on pretty good, is the cost. There's a lot of cost to that. There's the salaries more, you have to take in their benefits, taxes, those types of things. And then the other thing, as far as cost goes, it's not as big of a deal, but really just equipment, right? Like maybe you have to have a larger office space to accommodate having these people in your office. Maybe it's just buying equipment, right? That's something we have to deal with and we take care of at Zibtek, is we make sure that our engineers have adequate equipment to do their job, right? And obviously we have our tech leads and we have our management that is aware of the requirements of that equipment. We have run across some clients where, they've talked about either their current developer or past developer that they've had in-house that, demanded some, $5,000 rig to do their job. And the owner of the business isn't technical, so they weren't able to challenge them. So, they end up having to shell out all this money for some fancy equipment that ultimately the developer really just didn't need. He just wanted the shiniest, newest thing to play with, right? So that, it's not a big deal. I mean, it's, when you talk about, hiring someone for a year, $5,000 out of their, $140,000 salary is not too big of a deal, but it is something that comes up. The other cons of working with the US Direct is they're really working as an individual a lot of the time, right? Or maybe it's just one or two people working if you have a smaller team. We get a lot of clients that come to us that had a US developer, and now they need to come to us to help them, right? And there's many reasons why they come to us after the US developer. Maybe that person quit, right? Maybe they didn't see eye to eye, that person quit. Maybe that person fell sick, maybe something happened to them, or maybe that person, we've seen, unfortunately, almost extort the person, right? Because, hey, I built your entire application end to end, I know all the code. If you don't, double my salary, I'm gonna take your app down, or I'm gonna steal your code, or I'm just gonna leave it, and knowing that no one can come and take care of it because of the way I wrote it. There's no one that's going to understand it, right? So we've seen that a lot. And so that runs into, companies that are hiring a single in-house developer. They have no redundancy, no documentation. There's no way to vet that they're actually meeting standards of the tech stack or the language that they're writing the application in. So it really leaves a company at high risk, right? Again, unfortunately, maybe that developer gets hit by a bus one day, right? And nobody knows how to get into that code. Nobody knows how the code's written. It really leaves a company at a huge, huge risk.
Yeah, we've actually seen a lot of different things happen across the board. So I think it's really important to note that with Zibtek, we actually start the project out and make sure that everything that we do, whether it's servers, repositories, all of that, is in the client's name. They have full access to that. They could take it and leave at any point. We're not going to sequester any of that stuff. I've actually heard some horrifying stories, and it's literally, it could be 6 months worth of work or a year worth of work where the client has no idea what's going on. And that seems absurd, but I've literally talked to people that have been in that situation where I guarantee, have lost tens of thousands of dollars. So the way that we start the project and the way that we have transparencies and the way that we give you access to all of that, that's a huge security for you starting that project out.
Definitely. Yeah, it's we get a lot of those, a lot of those projects coming in. So the other thing that is kind of a big con for US developers if they're working in the office is they can ultimately be distracted, and they can be kind of working in a bubble, right? One, I guess, so for the distracted portion, right? It's they're in the office, they're working around other coworkers. Some of it might just be chit chat, right? Some of it might be they have to go talk to somebody to figure out what needs to be done, right? And there's a lot of time that they're not coding, but they're actually like gathering requirements or trying to understand things because they don't have that set up in their office, right? Especially for smaller companies, if they hire 1 or 2 developers, they don't have an infrastructure or organization to build a development team and properly create tickets and sprints and organize it that way. They're just throwing needs over to a developer, and he's spending half of his day understanding those requirements or documenting those requirements, and only half of his day actually writing code and building features. The next is kind of working in a bubble. What a lot of people don't understand is there's really 2 ways to write code. There's the wrong way and the right way. And there's a big time gap between those 2. And ultimately, what people don't see is a lot of developers can get something to work, right? They can build something to cover your need, but they didn't necessarily build it the right way, right? They didn't follow the standards correctly. So it might work right now and it's great. And most clients and stakeholders are happy because they ask for an app to do X, Y, and Z, and it does that. But what they'll find, months down the road, or maybe even years down the road, is what that person built is not up to standard, and it's going to break on them, or it's going to be required to be completely rewritten within, again, months or years because of the way that they did it. Basically, or maybe that person again leaves and nothing's documented. So now you bring in a new developer, a new team, and they can't work with that code because of the way it was written, right? It's sometimes referred to as like spaghetti code, right? You try to follow a piece of spaghetti, on a plate. Good luck trying to find end to end, right? And so that's another thing that puts companies at risk, right? And something that maybe won't rear its ugly head until, again, like I said, months or years down the road. But it is something to burn them because there's really no quality control, especially when you only got 1 or 2 people working, right? So with that, jumping into kind of the pros of working with somebody outsourced, the top one is always going to be cost. Kind of going right from that is really, if you look at the cost variation there, you can have 2 developers working for the cost of 1 US developer. The nice thing for that is it allows for specialization. Ultimately, there are full stack developers. There are people that can do front end and back end coding. But ultimately, what we'll find is there's never a true full stack developer. There's a back end developer that can do front end, or a front end developer that can do back end. People are always going to kind of lean to one side or the other. So if you can hire 2 people for one, what that's allowing you to do is getting an all-star back end that's just back end coding all day, and then another all-star front end that's just doing front end all day. It really helps really up quality at the end of the day. Another little pro that's actually really helpful for a lot of teams is they can do the deployments at night. We don't have to ask anybody to stay up late or do anything like that because they're already, during the US, nighttime is when they work. So we can put out requirements, they can work at night, and then when we come back in the morning, all those deployments are done. It's not going to interrupt like uptime for the application. We're not going to interrupt people trying to use the application during the US hours. So that's always very nice. And then really the other big thing with outsourced partners, some you can go direct, right? You can just kind of rent a dev where you just get a single person. Companies like Zibtek, all of our guys are trained to work in a team, right? So all of our guys are trained to document their code, format their code correctly. They all know how to use Git and version control. So ultimately, if you work with a company like Zibtek, you'll ensure that all of your code is inside of a repository and it's in a place that you can access it. It's documented and it's really set up in a way where, right, since our developers are trained to work in a team and they collaborate, your code and everything's already set up to be able to bring developers on. So if you want to hire your own developer at that time or hire another outsourced company, everything's already set up for that. So kind of touching base again, like we talked about earlier, you hire someone direct in-house, they're not going to spend their time documenting code for someone that's not there, right? They don't care about that. They only care about writing what's in front of them. So they're not spending a bunch of time documenting things. They're not spending a bunch of time putting it up into a repo. A lot of the time we find people just have a copy of it on their local machine and that's it. And so that's always a huge pro. One, it helps you scale, helps you add more people, but it helps with that redundancy. You know that your code's in a good place where you can work with additional companies or hire other people on. The other thing that you don't get when you hire, US in-house, and not necessarily with every outsourced partner, but again, with someone that's like a managed partner like ourselves, when you hire us and bring us on and you have a developer, we have our in-house project manager and tech lead assigned to every project. So you're not just getting a single engineer, but you're getting experience and expertise from a project manager that's here in the US and a tech lead with, anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 years of experience. And that's going to be overseeing your project and making sure things are done. Awesome. So I guess, yeah, just kind of jumping back into really having like a group knowledge, right? So a US engineer or somebody that you hired locally, really they just have themselves to turn to, right? No engineer knows everything end to end, right? They've never built every single feature, right? Every time you bring a new feature, they're probably having to figure something out, right? It could be something they've never done before. So that leaves them to either turn to friends that they might have working at different companies, or they have to just go online. The nice part with working with a partner is our office is full of engineers. I think we have roughly 70 engineers at the moment. So when our engineer gets a task, they're not just by themselves, right? They can use resources online, obviously, which is what every developer does pretty much day in and day out, but they can also turn to other people in the office. And out of those 70 people, there's a really good chance somebody in our office has come across the problem that they're running into or built a feature similar to what they're working on. And that can extremely, help with performance, speed, and how well it's built, right? If you can kind of understand what type of obstacles you're coming into with a new feature, and you have somebody that's kind of gone through that already, it's going to really help that engineer, build that feature out and build it quickly. And really just like the last item is, kind of reiterating on similar things, but again, they're just focused, right? The way that our engineers work is they come into work every day. They've got tickets broken down in a proper way where they're clear on the requirements, and they can pretty much just take that ticket. Obviously they have to read through it. Maybe they have some quick questions, but 7 to 8 hours of their day every day is spent coding. They're not talking to people or trying to gather requirements. They're just coding all day. That's what our project manager and our tech lead are there for. So there's a lot of infrastructure pieces, right, from the US side versus the outsourced side. So there's pros and cons to both. Ultimately, some things work better for others. Some people, having somebody in the US, maybe the CEO or CTO of a company is technical enough where they can hire somebody in the US and they don't need them to be managed. They don't need, they're aware of code needs to be documented. So maybe there's all those things are already covered for their company, and having somebody in the US is the best option for them. Sometimes people need the outsourced option because they don't have the infrastructure for it, or maybe they just don't have the cost for it. We obviously know, with the current climate, everybody's kind of hurting for money. That's why I think this topic's been requested a lot is, one, how do I budget? How much should it cost? But also, like, what's the most cost-effective way for me to build software? And ultimately, at the end of the day, the most cost-effective way is typically outsourcing. As long as you can outsource properly, and you go with a good outsource company that's going to kind of handle all of these management pieces for you.
And actually, to go along with that, Hunter asked a question, and I think it's relevant. We hit on it a couple times, maybe at the start, but I would like to expand on that. It's if you're going with a US dev, you expect better output. But is that true? And then if yes, what output should we expect from the lower rates of an outsourced developer, or a developer in India? In this case, our developers are in Bangalore. If you know anything about Bangalore, India, or India in general, there's billions of people, and a lot of them are tech-minded. So it's kind of the mecca of technology and where a lot of things started and began. And they've got some really great resources. They've got great, almost Ivy League schools that we can source from. And so in terms of output, you shouldn't really expect any less output. I mean, it's more about, how many years of experience, what kind of experience. It's pretty much the same as what you would find in the US. It's just, the rates there are less. So we share that cost benefit with you. I would say that's pretty much the crux of it, right?
Yeah, I would definitely never see or expect, a US engineer to output more than an engineer from, again, like South America or India. The only thing I've really seen in my experience where maybe there's the perception of that is because I think US developers can do a better job of justifying why something's taking as long as they do, just culturally, right? The people in the US workforce are better at communicating, hey, this is, even coming up with excuses typically, right? They're a lot better at coming up with excuse. A lot of the guys we work with in India, they're not used to that. That's not part of their culture of coming up with excuses, right? If you say, hey, why is this taking so long? They just say, sorry, I'll try to, I'll try to do it faster. Versus when you talk to somebody in the US, they can give you all these reasons, right? And tell you, which good or bad, kind of, you can kind of take that as your own. But, a lot of the clients we've worked with where like they say, well, it seemed like I was getting more done with my US developer. Then I worked with somebody maybe, in South America or something like that. And it seemed like the quality wasn't the same, but when you kind of get into the details, you realize like they're getting the same amount of work done. It's just the perception is the US guy got more done because maybe the US guy's just a little bit better at kind of pepping himself up and telling the CEO or whoever's managing them, they're able to kind of tell them how great they are and how good they're doing. We see that a lot.
Yeah, I don't think that we're really, this isn't a pitch to advocate for in-house or outsourcing. I think it's more about fit, right? So what we really try to find is if someone wants to have in-house developer or technology team, that's great. You kind of have to look at the pros and cons, which is what we're basically doing, is just outlining the facts. None of this is to convince somebody, because honestly, that doesn't work in our favor, it doesn't work in your favor if it's not a great fit. So if somebody comes in and they can see a fit with an outsourced team, we would love to work with them.
Yeah, and I think from this talk, we're probably a little biased towards outsourced in the sense that it's what we do with, and most of the people that come to us because their last developer failed are US developers. So we might be a little biased, but like Brandon said, what we're trying to do is just really give people information to help them make the best choice, and make the best fit. I mean, I'll tell you right now, what I've found that's pretty black and white. Like if you're looking for something small, right? You were looking to build like a WordPress site, or you just want to manage some sort of very small piece of software, it would be best just to hire someone in-house, because when it's a small piece of software, or maybe it's like a marketing site that you're constantly wanting to update, trying to work with someone outsourced is difficult, right? Trying to like line up times to communicate, all those things, it can be difficult. So whenever I've found success stories, like the most true success stories with US versus outsourced, is something like a smaller project or like a marketing site. It's pretty rare that goes smooth with outsourced versus when they're in the US, it's easy, right? You say, hey, can you go make a change on the site, do X, Y, Z? You just go bump the person on the shoulder and they do it. I could say right now that's pretty open and closed case of when US beats outsourced like 10 times.
But in mass quantity, then we have the advantage.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I think we covered quite a bit. I know we're pretty much at the time. We're over the time actually, but I don't know if anyone else has any other questions. And we'll give it 10, 15 seconds for the chat to update with any questions. But otherwise, it was really great chatting with all of you guys. Hopefully everybody learned something.
Yeah, we appreciate all the great information Colton gives us, and hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully we see you next month, and we'll be putting out what the topic is. Yeah. All right.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.